So Nick Carr stuff is pretty interesting. I mean, this idea of does the internet make you dumber is part of his critique against the sort of utopian or you know the idea that technology somehow makes us more perfect or better. And his argument here is that, in many ways, it's this Faustian bargain stuff that Postman was talking about. It's that efficiency and expediency and technological transformations to speed everything up doesn't really work when it comes to the mind and learning. And the whole gist of he wrote a book called The Shallows, and he's one of our leading intellectuals in terms of media critics. So you can see there's test questions at the bottom of each one of these slides. So, and I think they can be pretty easily answered. So what we seem to be sacrificing, according to Nick Carr, is what he says. He says, what we seem to be sacrificing in all our surfing and searching is our capacity to engage in the quieter, attentive modes of thought that underpin contemplation, reflection, and introspection. The web never encourages us to slow down. It keeps us in a state of perpetual mental locomotion, right? So what you can see what we seem to be sacrificing in all our surfing and searching is what? Well, it's the capacity to engage in the quieter, attentive modes of thought that underpin contemplation, reflection, and introspection. And what that means is this kind of deeper mode of intellectualism where we just kind of stop, we pause, and we think, right? That is what the internet discourages. And then the second question here is the quieter, attentive modes of thought underpin what? Well, they underpin contemplation, reflection, and introspection, right? And what does the web never encourage us to do? Slow down, slow down. All right, Carr continues. He says, it is revealing and distressing to compare the cognitive effects of the internet with those of an earlier information technology, the printed book. Whereas the internet scatters our attention, the book focuses it. Unlike the screen, the page promotes contemplativeness or like thought processes. So the test questions, what does the internet as opposed to the book do to our attention? Well, in terms of the cognitive effects, right? Uh, the internet scatters our attention, whereas the book focuses it. And I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, isn't it? It's like, the book is very directed. I mean, when you think of focus, it's very pointed, it's directed, it's very clear sort of information. Uh, and you moderate the book at your own pace, right? According to your own level, right? Whereas the internet is, in many ways, it just is scattered or disseminated information. And so, what does the page promote? What does the written textual page promote? Contemplativeness, and that means thinking or thought processes, right? Reflection, not speed or efficiency. That's the internet's job. All right, reading, according to Carr, reading a long sequence of pages helps us develop a rare kind of mental discipline. The innate bias of the human brain, or the kind of built in, right? The kind of genetically driven bias of the human brain, after all, is to be distracted. And so what he's saying there is like in our evolution, we had a lot of distractions. You think of like a rabbit or something. I mean, or we were either worried about being prey for other creatures or like other, humans, or we were trying to catch prey. So we were always distracted. So he continues here. Our predisposition is to be aware of as much of what's going on around us as possible. Our fast-paced, reflexive shifts in focus were once crucial to our survival. They reduce the odds that a predator would take us by surprise or that we'd overlook a nearby source of food, right? Uh, so reading a long sequence of pages helps us discover what? a rare kind of mental discipline, the kind of non-distracted mental discipline that really only comes from intense focus, right? As opposed to this built-in wiring in our brain, which is kind of always looking for distractions. Uh, Carr continues. He says, to read a book is to practice an unnatural process of thought. It requires us to place ourselves at what T.S. Eliot in his poem Four Quartets called the still point of the turning world. The still point of the turning world. We have to forge or strengthen the neural links needed to counter our instinctive distractedness, thereby gaining greater control over our attention and our mind. So the test question, we have to forge or strengthen the neural links needed to counter our instinctive what, right? And then he says, we have to forge or strengthen the neural links needed to counter our instinctive distractedness. Our instinctive distractedness. Remember, we're always like that's what it means to perceive. We're always getting pulled this way or that. It's hard to focus. That's the idea. And the internet does not lend itself to focus. Carr continues, he says, it's this control, this mental discipline, that we are at risk of losing as we spend ever more time scanning and skimming online. If the slow progression of words across printed pages damped our craving to be inundated or flooded by mental stimulation, the internet indulges it. It returns us to our native state of distractedness while presenting us with far more distractions than our ancestors ever had to contend with, right? Test questions. What are we at risk of losing as we spend ever more time scanning and skimming online? We're at risk of losing mental discipline, the control of being able to focus your mind, right? It sounds zen, and I think in many ways it is. Like if you are always distracted, it becomes very difficult to discipline yourself. So, I mean, you could think of like eating, like if you are used to eating whatever you want. I mean, this sometimes happens to athletes who burn a lot of calories, but then they injure themselves and they can't burn those calories, right? And so what happens is you've got an ever distractedness of palate, and then you stop burning all those calories. You need to focus, right? So what are we at risk of losing as we spend ever more time scanning and skimming online? Control, mental discipline. What does the internet indulge? It indulges our craving to be inundated or flooded by mental stimulation. That's what the internet is for. And this kind of ever Darwinian battle for our attention with various kinds of sensation and stimuli.